We get the thoughts of De La Salle University International Studies Professor Renato de Castro. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor. This will indeed be a big test for Mr. Marcos if he will really deep dive into this thorny maritime issues with Xi Jinping.
Well, yeah, he will discuss it. I have no doubt about it. There'll be probably have a very frank discussion. But the most what would happen is they will basically define. They'll draw the line. This is my position. Chances are, of course, President Ferdinand Marcos would raise the arbitral ruling again. And, of course, give his position that I will not surrender an inch in terms of Philippine territorial rights and, of course, sovereign territory. Xi Jinping, of course, would come out with his own notion that China's claim in the South China Sea is, of course, undisputable. We have, of course, had this claim. We have controlled the South China Sea since time immemorial. So in the end of the day, of course, chances are they will just agree to disagree.
Indeed. But you don't really expect any concrete solutions, any winning position for the Philippines when Mr. Marcos talks to Xi Jinping on this West Philippine Sea issue?
Well, at the end of the day, if you talk about resolving this issue, if you really push comes to shove, China would basically use its comprehensive power against the Philippines, which we don't want to happen. So the most, of course, is to be honest about it, the most both countries could do at this point in time is to manage, not to resolve dispute. In fact, that's the very essence of this hotline. Both sides are, of course, realistic enough to know that they have forces. You have the Chinese Coast Guard there, the People's Liberation Army's Navy, we have units of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. Every now and then, because we are sticking to our claim, you will have incidents. So the purpose of this hotline is to at least lower the tension, have an open communication every time you have an incident that will happen. In fact, just before, just last year, starting October, we have two major incidents with the Chinese.
Right, yes.
The first one, involving the blocking of a Philippine Navy ship that retrieved a debris from a Chinese satellite, and of course, eventually, the Chinese took control of that debris. Then, of course, the incident regarding the resupply in the Yuning Shoal.
Yeah.
The purpose, of course, this hotline is to have direct communication. So they would, of course, as the Chinese would often say, there will be no, miscalculation in terms of intention.
And of course, with those incidents, Professor, with those incidents that happened in the last quarter of 2022, I mean, we heard from the Philippine military and local senators denouncing this incursion into the West Philippine Sea. I mean, seriously, does Beijing listen to our concerns? Are they really taking us seriously?
Well, yeah, they listen to our concern, but their position is, until now, they own the South China Sea. It's taught in every Chinese school that the South China Sea belongs to China since time immemorial. So the goal of China is at this point in time to manage the dispute. And of course, the long-term goal is basically force countries in the region to accept China's undisputable claim in the South China Sea. So this is where, of course, the challenge comes in when President Marcos said, to our mutual interests. Because at the end of the day, it will be power that will be determining who owns the South China Sea and how the South China Sea issue would be resolved once and for all.
So, Professor, what about the friendlier relations between Marcos and the United States? Do you think that China will say something about this?
Oh, yes. China, of course, will have to take into account that any armed incident against the Philippines might trigger, the Mutual Defense Treaty. So this also makes the Chinese very careful in dealing with the Philippines. They know for a fact that, the South China Sea issue is happening in the wider context of the U.S.-China strategic competition. So this is where, of course, President Marcos has his ace on his sleeves. The fact that he was able to repair our alliance with the United States, which provides him a leverage in dealing with China.
All right. The West Philippine Sea will definitely be at the top of the agenda between Mr. Marcos and Xi Jinping. What about investments? I mean, we've seen the president visit several countries over the past several months. There have been billions of dollars in pledges. What do you think are we likely to get from the Chinese?
Well, that's usually the promise. Even when President Duterte went to China in 2016, you have the promise in terms of private and public investment. Let's just focus on the public investment. China promised in October 2016, $24 billion in infrastructure development. How much money actually entered the country?
Right.
Not a lot. And of course, also in terms of private investment. Of course, we also have to take into account now what would be Chinese economic trajectory based, of course, on the 20th Party Congress last October. A number of analysts are saying that China's economic trajectory will now focus more on the domestic rather than external.
You made a good point there, Professor, no? That there were a lot of promises, a lot of pledges from the Chinese government during the Duterte administration, but not a lot of direct foreign investments into the country. And of course, President Marcos's overseas trips in 2022 generated around $24 billion in investment pledges. I mean, are we really going to feel the fruits of these pledges with foreign capital flowing into the country? Or will it be something like China, only pledges, promises, but not a whole lot of direct investments?
Yeah, that's the joke regarding China. We did not experience a debt trap with China. We experienced a pledge trap with China. Pledges, 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 but at the end of the day, nothing came out.
Is that likely to happen as well? Is that likely to happen as well with this $24 billion worth of pledges from other countries that the president received during his trips?
Pledges coming in, but at the end of the day, those pledges would have to be implemented by private businessmen who would look at the infrastructure development in the country, the peace and order situation in the country. So we don't have the pledge, but at the end of the day, decision would have to be made by private entrepreneurs who will have to take into account the calculation there. Will my investment earn in the Philippines? So if I just look at the infrastructure, the level of infrastructure development in the Philippines, would I put my money where my mouth is when it comes to investment in the Philippines?
Professor, thank you so much for your insights.
Okay.
Renato de Castro, Del Salle University International Studies Professor.